This right here is a KTM 790. And that's a CFMOTO Duke 790, CFMOTO 790NK, KTM 800NK, CFMOTO 800NK. So, yeah, if you saw that first ride, a lot of mentions of the 790 appeared in that video. Why? Well, because the CFMOTO 800NK is based off of this motorcycle. And there are so many similarities between these two bikes. But I wanted to see if there was a reason why you should get the 790 over the 800NK. The 800 is cheaper. It has some awesome technology that this one lacks, but it is a little bit heavier. So there's a little bit of give and take. And today we're gonna dive into exactly what separates these two motorcycles and what one makes sense for which rider. So let's start out with the 790 here.
KTM's Duke 790 is packing a 799cc parallel twin, making 105 horsepower and 63 foot-pounds of torque while weighing in at only 384 pounds. It's very svelte with not a single extra bolt, but some of that frugality comes with a little bit of a budget feel. More on that in a second. The bike's packing a full suite of modes and rider aids, with it all being controlled via a 5-inch TFT display. The best thing I can say about the TFT is that it gets the job done, which is industry speak for this dash is kinda bad. I'm not pleased to report that KTM's TFTs are some of the weakest I've seen, even on the Super Duke. The CFMOTO 800NK is packing a 799cc parallel twin that looks awfully familiar. That's because it's the licensed KTM motor, except it's all blacked out. I've seen claim numbers all over the place, from 94 horsepower to 95 horsepower, even 99, but according to CFMOTO, it's putting down 100 horsepower and 60 foot-pounds of torque. All that while weighing in at 410 pounds. I'm not sure if it's a true wet weight or if it's without gas, but either way, the Duke comes in over 25 pounds lighter. But CFMOTO has a much nicer dashboard, much nicer clusters, and you want to know a secret? Both these bikes are built in China. Check the VINs if you doubt me. In terms of major differences, let's get as many as we can in a few seconds here. First, the KTM does have a steering stabilizer and a quick shifter fitted from the factory. The CFMOTO does not. And yes, I know international ones do have a quick shifter, but this is America and we're looking at an American motorcycle. It's also worth pointing out that the quick shifter on the 790 needs to be activated, so I'm going to call it worse than not having one. The NK has cruise control, the KTM does not. The NK has fully adjustable suspension from an unbranded source. The KTM has WP suspension, but it is non-adjustable. The CFMOTO has 320mm rotors up front, and the KTM has 300. In the rear, the NK has a 2-pot caliper, and the KTM has a single pot.
Mounting up on the 790, the biggest thing that I can say about this thing is that it feels like a KTM. It's very, very aggressive in the way that it sits. You feel like you're on a little supermoto. The seat, unfortunately, is not nearly as comfortable as on the NK, but the reach of the bars is very similar. The rest of the motorcycle feels pretty damn similar, I'm not gonna lie. However, I can't help but notice, sitting on the 790, it doesn't feel as good as sitting on the CFMOTO. Now, mounting up on the NK, the first thing that you're gonna notice is the difference in where the foot pegs are. It was the first thing that I saw when I sat on one and then moved over to the next. The foot pegs are very normal naked bike versus the KTM, which is very much supermoto. The pegs are a lot lower, it feels a little bit more roomier, and these pegs are farther forward. So there is a little bit of a difference in terms of the lower half of the ergonomics package. In terms of seat height, this feels a little bit lower to me, and the room up here, the reach to the bars, maybe a smidge taller. All in all, these are both very roomy motorcycles if you're a tall guy.
Before we hit the road, let me take a second to shout out Cardo's Black Friday sale. No longer will you need to battle your fellow man at dawn while stuffed full of turkey and pie. At dawn on the 5th day, you need not look to the east for hope. Just click that link down in the description below and use the code SPITE10 for 24% off your order. You already know that Cardo makes the best-in-class comm system for your ride with DMC mesh connection, long battery life, and high-quality JBL speakers. They've also got a new voice recording feature so that you can record yourself while you ride without having to get a giant motovlog setup like me. They've got comms that fit any budget or any use case. Click that link down in the description below and check out everything they have to offer and use the code SPITE10 for 24% off your order now through the end of the month. And with that, let's hit the road and see what the 790's all about.
Yeah, okay. So, pulling away on the KTM, the first thing that you know, wow, okay. The first thing that you notice about this bike is how much mid-range this thing has. Something about the middle of the power band just feels really, just, wow. It almost has like thumper torque. It's a really impressive mid-range on this motorcycle. And because it's so flippin' light, it goes side to side so damn fast. It's so quick to change directions. It really does ride a lot more like, say, a supermoto. God damn that torque though. Yeah, it rides a lot more like a supermoto than a naked bike. Now, as we're pulling onto this sort of bumpy road here, it is worth pointing out that the steering stabilizer really does make a difference on this bike. I thought it was just going to be this little thing that you feel on the highway. But because this bike is so light and something about the suspension geometry, it just makes the NK feel a little less stable around a corner, especially on some of these bumpier back roads. I really appreciate the steering stabilizer. And if I was going to keep the NK for long term, I would 100% go poach the KTM steering stabilizer, because you could just take it off that bike and put it on this one, or take it off this bike and put it on that one. Both work. Now, coming into these tighter corners up ahead, I do want to talk about the brakes. They are, as far as I can tell, the exact same brakes. My guess is that these are just branded KTM J1s, because this is the same master cylinder at the lever. Now, they are more effective on this bike 100% because they're stopping less bike. Wow, does this thing change directions fast. Wow, okay. Oh, and that mid-range. Oh, it's good on this bike. Oh, it's so good. Oh. Now, it is worth pointing out that while this riding experience is awesome, I really like the ride on this. This bike does not feel as premium as the NK does. I hate the way that the mode setting works. You have to go into set, you have to go down to ride mode, and then you have to switch it. That's a pain in the ass, and it shouldn't be that way. I also just don't like the way that the clusters feel. I don't like the way that they look compared to the NK. The NK just feels so much more premium. Something about the dashboard too. Much higher frame rate, a lot clearer. It feels like this bike is solely meant for somebody who's looking at the racetrack or the road in front of them and nothing else. Yeah! Oh, it's so good though. Oh man, is this bike good. When you get it doing what it wants to do, shoo boy, is this a good bike. Last thing we're going to do here though is we are going to do a quick little speed test leaving this stop sign, because yeah, of course we're going to do one. All right, let's see what you got. Let's go from 10. Nah, 15. Go! Woo-hoo! Yep, there was that steering stabilizer helping me out. This is a good bike. Oh, it's such a good bike. But let's go spring the CFMOTO, bring it out here, and see how it likes these twisties. Alrighty, pulling back into AF1, I wanted to actually film hot swapping these bikes because I got to ride it all the way back over to the other spot. So let's see what the immediate feel is like swapping over to the 800NK here. Okay, so immediately the seat architecture feels very similar. The seat definitely feels like it's a little bit more comfortable, and it feels like it's a little bit lower. The reach of the bars, very identical. I would say maybe just a teensy tiny bit taller, and yeah, you can definitely feel the extra weight on this motorcycle for sure. It's a lot heavier, you know, between the legs. But let's get this thing out on the road, see how it handles. So pulling away on the 800NK here, the first thing that I'll say is I don't feel like I've lost $700 in value. In fact, and this is something I was going to bring up later, I honestly feel like the dashboard and the cockpit that I'm looking down at is significantly more premium than what I saw on the 800 or the 790. This definitely is a much more premium looking cockpit between the TFT dash, which is much nicer, between the clusters, which are so much nicer, and the fact that it has a freaking mode button. Every bike that has modes needs to just have a hot swap mode button. It needs to be that simple. And, you know, the riding modes do make a big difference here. But, the real thing that is worth writing home about is that you've got the big button, what says M on it. Another right home feature, cruise control, baby. I need to be up in fourth gear. Hold on. There you go. Cruise control. As I go around this corner, I don't have to put any throttle in. Yay! So, okay. There's some differences right there. Obviously, this bike has a more substantial look to it. It definitely feels more like a Super Duke in terms of its size than something like the 790's little baby scalpel vibes. The 790 is a great bike, but it feels so little. This bike is certainly a lot more substantial, and along with that size comes additional weight, and there's a lot to talk about here. So, this bike is definitely heavier, and you can feel it side to side. However, I do find this thing feels more planted in a corner. Because of that extra weight, going around this bumpy road that I took the 790 down earlier, I don't really need the steering stabilizer like I did on that bike. The weight is really helping smooth out the ride. What it's not helping, though, is the motor. This bike definitely feels slower. I think the best way I can put it is that this bike feels like a base model in terms of its power delivery, and the 790 feels like the R model. So, you know, think of 890 and 890R. 890R is the more up-spec version. It's got a little bit more chutzpah, and I would argue that's the feel that I get here. We'll talk about that more in a second, but as we're railing through this corner here, let's talk about the brakes. They definitely feel like they're stopping a lot more motorcycle, so they're not nearly as sharp, but they're still a very good braking setup. And, you know, it doesn't turn nearly as sharply. That 790 was just like point and shoot. This one you gotta aim a little bit. And I do want to talk about that power. So between 4,000 and 6,000 RPM on the KTM in like third gear, if you were in that spot on the power band, it was party time. It was really happy to just give you a nice big whack of torque. This does not do that. That to me feels more like a tune than just the added weight on this motorcycle. It definitely feels like the mid-range is diluted somewhat, and artificially so, to create a bit of a difference there. Now, honestly, I do find that KTM mid-range was a lot. It was a lot. And it would be hard for me to recommend that bike as a commuter. With a more mellow mid-range, you could commute on this thing no problem, and it doesn't feel like it's going to snap your head back every time you twist the throttle. Now, I know I mentioned it earlier, but this suspension is fully adjustable, and as a result, I think this bike is going to work for a wider variety of riders. The 790 with the stock suspension, it felt fine, but this you can tune a lot easier. And do I feel like it's significantly different from the WP? No. It feels good. And I know I can make it feel better if I were to go in and tune that suspension a little bit. But now that we're pulling up to the stop sign, let's do a little acceleration test, shall we? From about 15-ish. Let's go. So going over some of those bumps, I did feel a lot more instability in the KTM. The weight is definitely smoothing out the ride on this, which makes it feel easier. This is an easier motorcycle to ride. It just is. Let's pull this thing over real quick and let's answer some questions from the Discord boys about this bike and the 790 and get my final thoughts in order. Yeah, it's not slow. It's just not as fast as the KTM. Alright, yeah, let's pull over.
So I figured it would be fun for me to go over some questions from the Discord server just to make sure that I'm getting everybody's questions and hitting on all the stuff that you guys would want me to cover. So, diving on in, we've got a Versa. Between the CFMOTO and the KTM, which one do you think is the better daily commuter? 100% it goes to the CFMOTO. This thing is a lot less savage in the mid-range. Sure, the KTM has street mode and stuff, but I'm the kind of guy who just leaves it in sport mode because it's the most power. The main thing that makes this thing more dailyable is the inclusion of cruise control. That, and I do think that the ride quality is just a little bit more premium for the day-to-day on this bike. Funny Dasco's question. We've had a Dasco apocalypse on the Discord server. I woke up one morning and everybody was named Dasco. This Dasco asks, is the splash of orange worth the premium? Personally, no. I don't think so. This is an awesome motorcycle and it has features that I would rather have at a lower price. Corgi Dasco asking, is it about as subtle as picking between Kool-Aid Jammers and Capri Sun? No. Honestly, there's a lot of difference between these motorcycles. I think that the KTM is certainly more oriented for the track day kind of guy, somebody who's looking for a no-frills, all-sport experience, and the CFMOTO is definitely a bike for somebody looking for an awesome daily that they can have some fun with on the twisties. Pink Dasco asking, how are the ergonomics for a rider a little over 6 foot in height? They're great on both of these bikes. However, I do prefer the KTM. I do like the Supermoto stance on the 790. This is definitely a lot more standard naked bike. I prefer the KTM riding position more. And then the last question here from Stricken Chips. That's hard to say. If the CFMOTO and the KTM were both parked next to a cliff, which one would you push off the edge first? The KTM. If it's not clear already, between the two, at the price points they're listed at, I have to go with the CFMOTO. This bike gives you more features. It gives you a slightly artificially down-tuned engine, but it's a ton of fun to ride. And I bet you a bunch of those features that are on the KTM can just be bolted onto this for around about the same price, and you have cruise control. You can't just add that to the 790. It's a lot more than just bolting on a steering stabilizer or adding the quick shifter on this bike. I know that looks are very subjective, but personally, I think that the CFMOTO looks better, and I appreciate a fully adjustable suspension because it just means that as a bigger guy, I can get this bike to work a little bit better for me than something like the KTM. This is just set up for a wider array of riders, and it's cheaper. So with that being said, hopefully you enjoyed this look at the 790 Duke from KTM and the 800NK from CFMOTO. Let me know your thoughts down below and which one you would get after watching all of this mayhem. While you're down there, don't forget to check out Cardo's Black Friday deals. These are going on now through the end of the month, so you can get yourself a Cardo for 24% off by using my code. Click that link down in the description below. And with that, guys, I'll catch you in the next one. See you later.